Hello, I'm Stephen Koprince, Managing Partner of Koprince Law, LLC. And today I want to talk about an important change to the service-disabled veteran-owned small business programs that's coming as a result of the 2017 National Defense Authorization Act. The 2017 NDAA will essentially prevent the VA from developing and applying its own regulations to determine whether a company is a veteran-owned small business. Yes, you heard me right. If the President signs the current version of the 2017 NDAA into law, the VA will be prohibited from issuing regulations regarding the ownership, control, and size status of an SDVOSB or VOSB, which are, of course, the key components of SDVOSB and VOSB status. Instead, the VA will be required to use regulations developed by the SBA, which will apply to both federal SDVOSB programs. That's the SBA self-certification program and the VA's verification program. Now, in my experience, the typical SDVOSB believes that the VA verification process applies government-wide, relies on that VetBiz seal as proof of SDVOSB eligibility for all agencies' SDVOSB procurements. But contrary to this common misconception, there are actually two separate and distinct SDVOSB programs operating right now. The SBA's self-certification program, which is in fact the original SDVOSB set-aside program, is authorized in statute by the Small Business Act. It's codified in Title 15 of the U.S. Code and implemented by the SBA in its regulations in Title 13 of the Code of Federal Regulations. The VA's separate program is codified in Title 38 of the U.S. Code and implemented by the VA in its own regulations in Title 38 of the Code of Federal Regulations. Now, there are some important differences between the two programs right now. For example, the VA requires that the service-disabled veteran holding the highest officer position manage the company on a full-time basis during ordinary working hours of firms in the same or similar line of work. The SBA's regulations do not make this requirement. Following a 2013 Court of Federal Claims decision, the VA allows certain restrictions of a veteran's ability to transfer his or her ownership in the company. But that decision doesn't necessarily apply to the SBA, which has held that, quote-unquote, unconditional means unconditional, as applied to transfer restrictions. And of course, and most well-known, the VA's regulations require formal verification of SDVOSB or VOSB status. The SBA calls for self-certification in the SAM database. Despite these important differences, the two programs are largely similar in terms of their requirements right now. However, last year, the VA proposed a major overhaul to its SDVOSB and VOSB regulations. The VA's proposed changes would, among other things, allow non-veteran minority owners to exercise what I call veto power over certain extraordinary corporate decisions, like the decision to dissolve the company. The SBA has not proposed corresponding changes to its own regulations. In other words, were the VA to finalize its proposed regulations from 2015, the substantive differences between the two SDVOSB programs would significantly increase, likely leading to many more cases in which VA-verified SDVOSBs were found ineligible for non-VA SDVOSB contracts. Now, that all brings us back to the 2017 NDAA. Instead of continuing to allow the VA and SBA to separately define who is and who is not an SDVOSB, the 2017 NDAA establishes a consolidated definition in the statute. It'll be set forth in the Small Business Act, not in the VA's governing statutes. The 2017 NDAA then amends the VA statutory authority to specify that, quote, the term small business concern owned and controlled by veterans has the meaning given that term under the Small Business Act. A similar provision applies to the term small business concern owned and controlled by veterans with service-connected disabilities. And Congress doesn't stop there. The 2017 NDAA further amends the VA statute to specify that companies included in the VA's VetBiz database must be, and I'm quoting here, verified using regulations issued by the administrator of the Small Business Administration with respect to the status of the concern as a small business concern and the ownership and control of such concern. At present, the relevant statutory section merely says that companies in the database must be verified, and of course the VA is currently doing that verification using its own standards of ownership and control. Finally, the 2017 NDAA states that the Secretary of the Veterans Administration may not issue regulations related to the status of a concern as a small business concern and the ownership and control of such small business concern. So there you have it. The 2017 NDAA consolidates the statutory definitions of veteran-owned companies and calls for the SBA, not the VA, to issue regulations implementing this new statutory definition. The 2017 NDAA requires the VA to use the SBA's regulations and expressly prohibits the VA from adopting regulations governing the ownership and control of SDVOSBs. These prohibitions presumably will ultimately wipe out the two regulations with many SDVOSBs and VOSBs are very familiar. That's 38 CFR 74.3, the VA's ownership regulation, and 38 CFR 74.4, that's the VA's control regulation. Because both agencies, the VA and SBA, will be using the SBA's rules, the 2017 NDAA also provides that the SBA's Office of Hearings and Appeals will have authority to hear appeals from any small business that's denied verification by the VA. Now, this is an important development. Under current VA rules and its practice internally, there is no option to appeal a denial to an impartial administrative forum like the SBA Office of Hearings and Appeals. Intriguingly, the 2017 NDAA also mentions that SBA OHA will have jurisdiction, quote, if an interested party challenges the inclusion in the database of an SDVOSB or VOSB. It's not clear whether this authority will be limited ultimately to appeals of SDVOSB protests filed in connection with specific procurements, or whether competitors will actually be granted a broader right to protest the mere verification of a company in the VetBiz database. So, when will all these major changes occur? Well, not immediately. The 2017 NDAA states that these new rules will take effect, quote, on the date on which the Administrator of the Small Business Administration and the Secretary of Veterans Affairs jointly issue regulations implementing such sections, end quote. But Congress hasn't left the effective date entirely open-ended here. The 2017 NDAA provides that the SBA and VA shall issue guidance pertaining to these matters within 180 days of the enactment of the 2017 NDAA. After that happens, public comment will be accepted and final rules will eventually be announced. Now, given the speed at which things like this ordinarily play out, my best guess is that these changes will take effect probably sometime in 2018 or perhaps even the following year. Now, the House approved the 2017 NDAA on December 2nd, 2016. I'm speaking to you right now, December 7th, 2016. At this point, the bill now goes to the Senate, which is also expected to approve this measure. It's a conference bill. It's been approved by a conference committee. Once the Senate approves it, it will go to the President for review and signature. So in a matter of weeks, the 180-day clock for those joint SBA and VA proposals may start ticking, and the curtain may begin to close on the VA's authority to determine exactly who owns or controls a veteran-owned small business.